Jack Adams was a man who had everything: an empire worth billions, towering skyscrapers bearing his name, a fleet of private jets, and a penthouse that overlooked the restless heartbeat of Manhattan. To the world, he was the epitome of success, a titan in business whose decisions shaped industries and whose presence commanded respect. Yet beneath this polished exterior lay a man fractured by years of choices he could no longer undo. The relentless pursuit of power and wealth had come at a cost far greater than any financial loss: the silent abandonment of his daughter, Kate. For 2 decades, Jack had buried his guilt beneath contracts and board meetings, convincing himself that his absence was a sacrifice for the greater good. He told himself Sarah, his wife and the mother of his child, would protect Kate and provide the love he could not. But that was a lie he told to himself, a fragile veil over a growing void. The truth gnawed at him in the quiet moments. Birthday after birthday passed without a call, milestones unseen, the slow erosion of a father's presence into a ghost story told in whispers and what-ifs. When the call came from Ellen, Sarah's sister, it shattered Jack's carefully constructed world. Sarah was gone, taken by a car accident that left Kate orphaned and adrift. The weight of his neglect pressed down on him with unforgiving force. Ellen's voice, thick with grief and accusation, echoed the harsh truth Jack had long evaded: he had built his empire on the foundation of a broken family. Now, he had to face the consequences. Driven by a desperate need to find Kate, Jack hired a private investigator. Days later, the truth emerged: Kate was not living a life of privilege, but one of quiet struggle in a small town far from the glittering towers he called home. She was a waitress, worn thin by hardship, raising a son alone with no knowledge of the father who had forsaken her. The man who once commanded boardrooms now found himself powerless in a dimly lit diner, watching a stranger who was his daughter move with a weary resilience he had never taught her. The walls between them were thick with years of silence and pain. Kate's anger was a shield, her rejection a testament to the wounds Jack had inflicted by absence. Yet beneath the bitterness, he glimpsed a spark of the family he had lost, a fierce, emerald-eyed strength that mirrored Sarah's own. As Jack struggled to bridge the chasm of time and hurt, he faced not only the challenge of redemption but a deeper reckoning, the realization that money could never buy what he had denied for so long: the love, trust, and presence of a father. Jack Adams was born into a modest family on the outskirts of Detroit, a city scarred by the slow decay of its industrial glory. His father, a hard-working mechanic with hands calloused from years of toil, and his mother, a schoolteacher with a gentle voice that often tried to soften the hardness of their reality, shaped Jack's earliest understanding of the world. From a young age, Jack learned the value of perseverance, but also the bitter taste of limitation, the feeling that no matter how hard you worked, some ceilings were unbreakable. This unspoken barrier kindled in him a restless fire, a determination to escape the shadow of mediocrity and carve out a legacy that would endure. School was a battleground where Jack excelled, not because learning came easy, but because he refused to be left behind. He was meticulous, calculating, always 3 steps ahead. Yet beneath the relentless ambition was a boy who craved approval, whose quiet vulnerability he buried beneath sharp intellect and an unwavering facade of confidence. His father's silent pride was his compass, but the emotional distance between them left a void he sought to fill with achievement. Success, Jack learned early, was currency, not just for wealth, but for love and respect he feared might otherwise be denied. By the time he reached college, Jack was no longer just a boy from a struggling family, he was a force to be reckoned with. He devoured business textbooks, built networks, and chased internships with the zeal of a man possessed. But the very traits that fueled his rise also forged walls around him. Intimacy was an afterthought, relationships were transactional, and emotions something to be managed or suppressed. Love, in its messy, unpredictable form, was something Jack feared because it demanded vulnerability he was unwilling to surrender. Sarah entered his life during those pivotal years, a bright, compassionate woman whose warmth seemed to crack the surface of Jack's carefully guarded world. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe in something more than ambition, a partnership, a family. But as the demands of his burgeoning empire intensified, Sarah's quiet needs were drowned out by boardroom battles and endless flights. Jack's absence became a pattern, an ache that neither money nor apologies could soothe. The distance grew until it became a chasm, swallowing shared dreams and replacing them with regret. The birth of their daughter, Kate, was meant to be a new beginning, a chance to rewrite the narrative. But even as he held her fragile form in those first few days, Jack's mind was already racing ahead, plotting the next deal, the next conquest. Fatherhood became a role he performed at a distance, a checkbox in a life that demanded sacrifice above all else. The guilt simmered beneath his pride, but it was easier to bury it beneath work than confront the cracks in his own soul. Now, standing on the precipice of loss, Jack is forced to confront the man he has become and the father he failed to be. The empire he built stands tall, but its foundations tremble under the weight of years spent chasing shadows. Inside, the battle rages, between the hunger for power that shaped him and the fragile hope that he can still reclaim the love he abandoned. This is a man unraveling, stripped of pretense, forced to reckon with the very parts of himself he long denied, his fear, his regret, and the aching desire to be forgiven. The truth, as it often does, arrived not with a thunderous crash but as a slow, creeping erosion, insidious and relentless, like the cold drip of water wearing away stone. For years, Jack had built his life on pillars of carefully constructed lies, both to others and, more devastatingly, to himself. The empire he ruled, the image of control and success, masked the fragile fractures beneath, fractures born from sacrifices made without question, from choices driven by ambition that blinded him to everything else. He had convinced himself that the price of success was worth every broken promise, every missed birthday, every silent phone call from a daughter whose face he barely recognized anymore. But that was before the truth began to claw its way out of the shadows, before the quiet confession that shattered the fragile illusion. The truth that Sarah had never stopped waiting, never stopped hoping he would change, even as she built a life quietly unraveling without him. The truth that Kate's loneliness was not the absence of love but the presence of a father who chose work over them, repeatedly, deliberately. More painful still was the revelation that the foundation of his empire, the ruthless deals, the endless expansions, were not just built on market strategy and vision, but on betrayals and broken alliances that mirrored the betrayals of his own heart. The man he had once trusted as a mentor and friend, the one who promised loyalty, had quietly undermined him, feeding on his blind spots and insecurities. Jack's success was not solely his own, it was a fragile mosaic held together by debts he hadn't fully accounted for, debts that threatened to implode everything he had fought so hard to create. And beneath it all, the cruelest truth lingered, one that cut deeper than any failed deal or fractured relationship. The realization that in his relentless pursuit of control, Jack had become a stranger to himself. The reflection in the mirror was not the boy who dreamed of greatness but a man haunted by regret, a prisoner of his own choices. His victories tasted hollow, his power a cage. The warmth he longed for was replaced by cold calculations, and the love he sacrificed was gone, irretrievable. This bitter truth was not just about loss, it was about awakening. A forced reckoning with the consequences of a life lived in denial, where success was measured not in happiness but in conquests and trophies. Now, with the walls closing in, Jack faced the most daunting challenge of all, confronting the man he had become, embracing the pain he had long suppressed, and finding within himself the fragile strength to seek redemption before everything truly crumbled. Jack's search for Kate began not with a clear plan or a confident stride, but with a hollow ache that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness, a persistent whisper of what he had lost and desperately hoped to reclaim. The early days were marked by frustration and a creeping sense of helplessness, as every lead seemed to dissolve into thin air, every number dialed unanswered, every familiar place a silent testament to his absence. It was as if she had slipped through his fingers, becoming a ghost in the city he thought he knew so well. But this wasn't just a physical search, it was a journey into the deepest recesses of his own soul. Each step forward forced Jack to confront memories long buried, the missed milestones, the laughter he never heard, the nights she cried silently while he chased deals in distant cities. The weight of his failure pressed down on him with unbearable clarity, and he realized that finding Kate wasn't simply about location, it was about bridging the vast emotional chasm he had created. His pride, once an impenetrable shield, began to crack under the rawness of his regret. Jack found himself revisiting old haunts, schools she attended, parks where she might have played, the tiny apartment Sarah once called home. Each place echoed with the ghost of what could have been, stirring a cocktail of hope and despair. He reached out to friends and acquaintances, some wary, others sympathetic, but all carried the unspoken question, was Jack Adams truly ready to face the daughter he had neglected for so long? As days bled into weeks, Jack's internal landscape shifted. The search became less about reclaiming lost time and more about understanding who Kate had become without him. He imagined her anger, her confusion, the ways his absence might have shaped her. This thought both terrified and motivated him. He wanted to prepare himself for rejection, for the possibility that she might never want him back, yet a stubborn hope burned, a fragile thread binding his fractured heart. Late one rainy evening, after hours of dead ends, a message arrived, a brief, hesitant note from someone who claimed to know Kate. The promise of reunion was tinged with uncertainty, but it shattered Jack's isolation like a sudden crack of thunder. The moment was not triumphant, it was fragile, precarious, a reminder that the road ahead would be long and fraught with emotional peril. Jack realized then that finding Kate was not an endpoint but a beginning. It was the first step toward unraveling years of silence and pain, toward rebuilding trust from the ruins of absence. And as he stared out into the darkened cityscape, he understood that this search was not just about a daughter, it was about the man he had lost and a chance, however slim, to rediscover himself through the fragile hope of forgiveness. The moment Jack stepped into the small, dimly lit cafe where they agreed to meet, a suffocating wave of anxiety twisted in his chest. The air felt heavy, charged with unspoken words and years of silence, as if the space itself held its breath, waiting for what was about to unfold. His eyes scanned the room, searching for the girl he barely recognized, no longer the child he'd left behind, but a woman forged by absence and guarded pain. Kate sat by the window, shoulders tense, her gaze sharp yet distant. There was a hardness in her eyes that immediately unsettled Jack, a barrier built not out of anger alone but something deeper, disappointment, betrayal, the echo of a father who had vanished without explanation. As he approached, every step felt weighted, as though he were crossing an invisible line into a territory marked by fragile boundaries and raw emotions. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, dense and uncomfortable, filled with everything they had left unsaid. Jack's throat tightened, he wanted to reach out, to apologize, to explain the years lost, but the words caught in a tangle of shame and fear. Kate's expression flickered, her body taut as if bracing for a storm. This was no reunion born of warmth or forgiveness, it was a battlefield of memories, wounds reopened and defenses raised. "I never stopped looking for you," Jack finally managed, voice low and cracked, the confession spilling out like a fragile thread in the heavy silence. But Kate's response was not relief or embrace, it was a bitter laugh, sharp and hollow. "Looking? Where were you when I needed you? When Mom was barely holding us together? When I needed a father and all I got was silence?" Her words hit him like a blow, raw and unforgiving. The guilt that had haunted him for years surged, fierce and unrelenting. Jack felt the weight of every missed moment, every broken promise, compressing into this one painful exchange. Yet beneath the anger, he glimpsed the fragile hope flickering in her eyes, a desperate wish for connection, for something real beyond the scars. "I know I failed you," he said quietly, voice heavy with regret. "But I want to make it right. I want to try." The vulnerability in his tone was unfamiliar, but necessary, a fragile offering laid bare. Kate's gaze softened for a heartbeat, a crack in her armor. But then the shadow returned, harder this time. "Try. You think a few words can fix 16 years of absence. You don't get to erase the past with promises." The tension hung thick between them, a mix of sorrow, anger, and a yearning neither dared fully admit. In that charged silence, Jack realized this meeting was just the first painful step on a long, uncertain path. Redemption would not come easily, and forgiveness was a mountain to climb. But beneath the storm of emotions, a fragile seed of possibility had been planted, if only they could nurture it beyond this moment of pain. As they sat there, two strangers bound by blood and history, the fragile hope of reconciliation flickered dimly, waiting for time, for patience, and for the courage to face the wounds they both carried. Jack's attempts to bridge the chasm between him and Kate unfolded slowly, painfully, like tentative steps across a fragile ice floe. Every gesture carried the weight of years lost, every word balanced between hope and fear. He approached these moments with a mixture of urgency and caution, aware that the past had carved deep scars, yet desperate to offer something steady, something real. He began by listening, truly listening, for the first time in his life. Kate's voice was a cautious river, flowing with memories she had long buried, anger tempered by vulnerability. Jack learned to hold the silence that followed her pauses, understanding that trust was not granted but earned, drop by drop. He spoke less of grand promises and more of small truths, acknowledging his faults, recounting the nights he'd spent haunted by regret, the futile search for a way back when he had no map. Each shared moment revealed fractures, but also fragile beginnings. There were evenings when Kate's eyes filled with tears she tried to suppress, moments when Jack caught himself holding back the flood of emotion he had so long repressed. The gulf between them was vast, shaped not only by time but by the invisible walls built from disappointment and hurt, yet in that slow reclamation of presence, something flickered, a tentative warmth, a glimmer of mutual recognition. Jack found himself haunted by the duality of his role, both as the father he longed to be and the stranger she barely trusted. He wrestled with the crushing weight of inadequacy, knowing that no amount of apologies could undo the years, no simple gesture could erase the loneliness she endured. Yet, he persisted, knowing that connection was forged in persistence and presence rather than sudden, dramatic declarations. He began to weave himself into the quiet rhythms of Kate's life, showing up when it mattered, offering support without pressure, allowing her the space to reclaim her own narrative while gently intertwining his own. It was a dance of patience and humility, a relinquishing of control, where he learned to value her silence as much as her words. At times, the shadows of his past mistakes loomed large, old fears resurfacing, the haunting question of whether his presence would ultimately bring healing or more pain. But beneath the uncertainty, Jack felt a slow transformation within himself, a shift from desperate redemption to a grounded resolve to simply be there, imperfect and persistent. This fragile process was neither linear nor certain, marked by setbacks and moments of doubt, but with every cautious step, the distance between father and daughter softened, revealing the possibility of something neither had dared to hope for before, a fractured relationship beginning to mend, a shared future waiting to be written in the quiet spaces between their words. The past was a relentless shadow that clung to Jack with unforgiving grip, a labyrinth of memories twisting deeper every time he tried to confront it. It was not just the absence that haunted him, it was the tangled web of mistakes, regrets, and silences that had defined his life's most painful chapters. Each step toward reconciliation with Kate was shadowed by the ghosts of what could have been, by the bitter knowledge that time itself was an enemy he could never fully defeat. Jack's mind often spiraled back to those fractured years, the nights he stayed awake wrestling with the consequences of choices made in desperation, the bitter arguments with people who once meant everything but had since become strangers in his story. There were moments he remembered vividly, etched like scars, the day he left, the bitter words exchanged that neither of them could unsay, the silence that followed like a wall rising higher with every passing day. He could still feel the sharp sting of Kate's tears, her small hands pushing him away, and the unbearable weight of his own helplessness. But it was not only the past with Kate that unsettled him, there were darker, more tangled conflicts that gnawed at his soul. The years of addiction and failure that preceded his disappearance, secret battles fought alone, hidden beneath a facade of control, were demons that still whispered in the quiet moments. He had been a man broken by his own choices long before he left, and that brokenness had cascaded down to those he loved most. In confronting Kate, Jack was forced to confront himself, the father who had been absent, the man who had failed to protect, to provide, to forgive himself. He wrestled with self-loathing as much as with her anger. The silence between them often felt like a battlefield where his guilt fought against her resentment, each unwilling to surrender, each scar a reminder that some wounds were slow to heal. Yet beneath the pain was a fragile yearning, a desperate hope that the truth, no matter how painful, could serve as a bridge rather than a barrier. Jack began to share the hidden chapters of his life, the darkest hours, the moments of weakness and the hard-won steps toward redemption. His confessions were tentative, vulnerable admissions that he was not the hero she might have wanted, but a flawed man trying to find his way back. Kate listened, sometimes with tears, sometimes with clenched jaws, struggling to reconcile the father she remembered with the man before her now. Her own past wounds surfaced, memories of abandonment and betrayal that shaped her fiercely independent but guarded spirit. The conflict between them was not merely about lost time, but about the complicated dance of forgiveness, the aching need to reclaim lost love without erasing the pain it carried. Every conversation, every confrontation was a test of endurance and vulnerability, a psychological duel where neither could afford to be anything but honest, even when the truth threatened to shatter the fragile truce they had begun to build. The past was not a distant story but a living presence, one that demanded recognition, reckoning, and ultimately, release. Through this struggle, Jack slowly understood that reconciliation was not a destination but a process, a continuous unfolding of truths, tears, and tentative trust. The past would always be a part of them, a shadow cast long and dark, but it no longer had to define the light they might find together. In embracing the complexity of their shared history, they began, painfully but authentically, to rewrite what it meant to be father and daughter. Jack's decision to help at the local diner was born from a complex blend of guilt, a yearning to reconnect with a world he had long abandoned, and an unspoken hope that through service, he might find some measure of redemption. The diner itself was a humble place, far from the opulence he once chased in his earlier life, weathered booths, flickering neon signs, the faint smell of frying oil mingling with the comforting scent of brewed coffee. It was a refuge for people whose stories were etched in the lines of their faces and the weariness in their eyes, a microcosm of the community Jack had distanced himself from but now desperately wanted to be part of again. Every shift behind the counter became an exercise in humility. Jack was no stranger to leadership or command, but here, he was a novice, fumbling with orders, struggling to navigate the rhythms of everyday lives he had once overlooked. Each interaction was a small but powerful reminder of his own fragility, how far he had fallen from the man he had been, and how much he still needed to learn about empathy and patience. It was in these moments, beneath the hum of conversation and clatter of dishes, that Jack encountered the true texture of human resilience. Helping the community was not just about tangible acts, delivering meals to the elderly, organizing food drives, or offering a listening ear to those who came through the diner's doors. It was a journey into the depths of connection and responsibility. Jack found himself confronted by stories of hardship, addiction, and quiet heroism that mirrored his own struggles and failures. He met faces marked by hardship but lit by an unyielding spirit, people who, despite their pain, still chose kindness over despair. Their courage both humbled and inspired him. Yet, beneath the surface of these acts of goodwill, Jack grappled with his own internal resistance. The psychological weight of unworthiness often threatened to undermine his efforts, questions that whispered in the silence of his mind: did he deserve forgiveness? Could he truly make amends? Would his presence be seen as genuine or merely another hollow gesture? These doubts fueled a persistent self-examination, a reckoning that was as much about facing his inner demons as it was about serving others. As days turned into weeks, Jack noticed subtle shifts, not just in how the community responded to him but in how he perceived himself. The act of giving, once foreign and awkward, began to weave a fragile thread of purpose through his fractured identity. The diner's patrons became more than faces, they became anchors in a turbulent sea, grounding him in the reality of shared humanity. In the simple exchanges, a smile from Mrs. Thompson, who came daily despite her arthritis, a grateful nod from a young man rebuilding his life after prison, Jack glimpsed the possibility of healing through connection. The community, in turn, sensed his sincerity beneath the rough edges. Trust was not granted lightly, but earned through consistent presence and humility. Conversations deepened, and Jack found himself not just helping others but being helped, by their stories, their resilience, and their quiet acceptance. It was a symbiotic dance of broken souls seeking wholeness, a testament to the messy, beautiful complexity of human bonds. In this process, Jack learned that true assistance extended beyond physical aid. It demanded vulnerability, patience, and the willingness to confront one's own shadows alongside those of others. Helping the diner and the community became a mirror reflecting both his failures and his potential, a painful but necessary confrontation with the past and a tentative step toward a future where redemption was not a destination but an ongoing journey. Rebuilding a family is never a straightforward path. For Jack and Kate, it was a labyrinth of fragile hopes, silent pain, and moments heavy with unspoken words. After years apart, the idea of family had become a ghost haunting both their hearts, something once familiar but now foreign, shadowed by absence and the scars of betrayal. The first steps toward rebuilding were tentative, like stepping onto thin ice. Every glance, every hesitant word weighed with the possibility of breaking the fragile trust they were trying to weave anew. Jack approached these moments with a mixture of hope and fear, his internal world a storm of conflicting emotions. He longed to fill the void left by his absence, to be the father he had failed to be, yet he was painfully aware of how deep the wounds ran, wounds not only on Kate's side but etched into himself. The fear of rejection gnawed at him, the haunting thought that his efforts might be too little, too late. Each attempt to bridge the distance was met with Kate's cautious walls, her own armor forged through years of disappointment and self-reliance. She had learned to protect herself and her son by building barriers that Jack now had to gently dismantle, piece by piece. Conversations between them were often loaded with a quiet tension, words carefully chosen, each sentence carrying the weight of years lost. The silences spoke as loudly as the words, filled with memories neither wanted to revisit fully but both could not escape. Jack found himself confronting not only Kate's pain but the complex emotions within himself, guilt, regret, shame, but also a growing determination to heal what had been broken. It was a psychological struggle, where vulnerability was both a weapon and a shield, and forgiveness was a mountain yet to be climbed. The presence of Kate's son, too, added another layer to this fragile reconstruction. Jack's relationship with Tu was tentative, filled with unspoken questions and cautious steps forward. The boy's eyes held both curiosity and guarded skepticism, a reflection of the protective bubble Kate had created around him. Jack wanted to be more than a distant figure, he wanted to be a guide, a protector, a steady presence in the boy's life. Yet he knew that trust had to be earned slowly, with patience and consistent care. Every shared meal, every story told, every small act of kindness was a thread weaving a new fabric of family, fragile but slowly growing stronger. Kate herself was caught in a whirlwind of conflicting feelings. On one hand, she yearned for the family she had once dreamed of, the warmth and connection that had been stolen by time and circumstance. On the other, she carried the burden of betrayal and the scars of abandonment that made opening her heart feel perilous. Watching Jack struggle to be present forced her to confront her own fears of vulnerability. Would allowing him back in mean risking heartbreak all over again? Or was this the chance for a new beginning, imperfect yet authentic? Their interactions were marked by moments of unexpected tenderness, glimpses of a past love still flickering beneath the surface of guarded emotions. Small gestures, a shared laugh, a touch on the arm, a quiet conversation late at night, became symbolic acts of rebuilding trust. Yet these moments were fragile, always shadowed by the risk of reopening old wounds. The family they were trying to create was not an idyllic vision but a mosaic of pain and hope, of loss and the stubborn resilience of love. Psychologically, both Jack and Kate wrestled with their identities, who they were as individuals, as parents, and as partners attempting to reforge a bond fractured by time and circumstance. It was a process that demanded raw honesty, the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, and the willingness to accept imperfection. Forgiveness was not granted freely but was a laborious work of the heart, an ongoing negotiation between the past and the present. In the midst of this fragile rebuilding, Jack began to understand that family was not about erasing the past but embracing it, the pain, the mistakes, the losses, as integral parts of their shared story. It was about creating new memories while honoring old wounds, finding strength not in perfection but in acceptance. The journey was uneven, marked by setbacks and breakthroughs, by moments of doubt and flashes of hope. Yet within this complicated dance, a new family was taking shape, one that, though battered, was deeply human and real. The journey of healing between Jack and Kate unfolded not as a linear path but as a labyrinthine process, fraught with the complexities of human emotion and the scars left by years of absence and silence. It was a journey marked by small, fragile moments that carried the weight of unsaid apologies, tentative trust, and the desperate yearning for connection. At its core, this process was less about grand gestures and more about the subtle, often painful peeling back of emotional layers that both protected and imprisoned them. Jack, confronting his own failures and regrets, found himself wrestling with a deep internal dissonance. He wanted desperately to atone, to be the man and father he had once failed to be, but the shadows of his past mistakes loomed large, threatening to undo every step forward. Each interaction with Kate was a reminder of the distance he had created, a chasm filled with broken promises and lost time. His attempts at reconnection were often met with Kate's cautious reserve, her own defenses built not out of malice but from years of self-preservation. She had learned to survive on her own terms, and opening her heart again was a risk that felt almost unbearable. The subtle tension between them was a dance of vulnerability and guardedness. There were moments when the silence between them was heavier than words, pauses pregnant with meaning, where both were afraid to speak too loudly and shatter the fragile progress they had made. Jack's presence was at times a balm, offering a quiet reassurance that he was no longer the man who had walked away, but at other times a mirror reflecting the pain he had caused. For Kate, the process was equally torturous. Each small gesture of kindness from Jack brought a flicker of hope but also reopened wounds she had long tried to close. Her struggle was to balance the yearning for reconciliation with the instinct to protect herself and her son from further hurt. 2. The silent observer in this fragile dance, experienced his own internal conflict. The boy, whose life had been shaped in part by Jack's absence, was torn between curiosity and skepticism. His guarded demeanor was a shield against disappointment, but beneath it lay a longing for paternal connection, a yearning that Jack could sense even when it was unspoken. Building trust with two demanded patience and humility from Jack, who learned that fatherhood was not about grand declarations but about showing up consistently, day after day, in ways both small and meaningful. It was in the shared tasks, the quiet conversations, the simple presence that trust slowly began to take root. The psychological undercurrents of their interactions were complex and often contradictory. Jack was forced to confront his own feelings of inadequacy and shame, wrestling with the fear that he might never be able to repair the damage he had done. Kate grappled with ambivalence, hope shadowed by fear, love tangled with resentment. Their reconciliation was not a linear healing but a fluctuating emotional terrain where progress often came with setbacks. Each breakthrough was hard-won, a delicate balance of courage and forgiveness. Their conversations, when they happened, peeled back layers of pain and misunderstanding, revealing the humanity beneath the scars. They spoke not only of the past but of dreams deferred, fears unspoken, and the fragile hope of a future together. These dialogues were not always easy, sometimes they were filled with tension and tears, sometimes with silence that spoke volumes. Yet through it all, a new pattern emerged, a rhythm of connection that acknowledged their wounds without being defined by them. In this journey, the act of forgiveness was transformative yet arduous. Forgiveness was not simply an absolution but a process of acceptance, accepting imperfection, embracing vulnerability, and choosing to move forward despite uncertainty. It required both Jack and Kate to relinquish control, to trust not only in each other but in the possibility of change. This psychological surrender was both terrifying and liberating, allowing them to envision a relationship rooted in honesty rather than idealization. As the days passed, the fragile family began to coalesce, not as a perfect unit but as a collection of imperfect individuals striving toward understanding and connection. The wounds remained, but they no longer defined them entirely. Instead, these wounds became part of their shared story, a testament to resilience and the complexity of love. The journey of healing was ongoing, marked by moments of grace and moments of struggle, a continuous negotiation between the past and the future. Through this process, Jack discovered that healing was less about fixing what was broken and more about learning to live with the cracks, allowing light to filter through the fractures and illuminate the possibilities that lay ahead. Kate, in turn, found strength not in forgetting her pain but in embracing it as part of her identity, giving herself permission to hope again. Together, they navigated the uncertain terrain of rebuilding family, aware that the path forward would be long and fraught, but no longer impossible. In the quiet aftermath of years marked by absence, wounds, and tentative steps toward healing, the fragile threads that bound Jack, Kate, and two began to weave into a tapestry stronger than any of them had dared to imagine. The path to their reunion was never free of shadows. It was a journey where the past lingered in every glance, every unspoken hesitation, but gradually, those shadows softened, reshaped by the persistent light of forgiveness and understanding. Jack, once haunted by his failures, started to find a new sense of purpose in the rhythm of everyday life with Kate and two. It wasn't a grand transformation or a sudden epiphany but a slow, steady redefinition of himself, not just as a father or partner but as a man learning to be present, vulnerable, and responsible. He embraced the discomfort of confronting his past without retreating into denial or blame. In the quiet moments, whether helping two with his homework or sharing a hesitant smile with Kate across the dinner table, Jack found fragments of redemption, small but powerful tokens of the family he was slowly rebuilding. Kate, too, underwent a profound internal shift. The walls she had so carefully constructed around her heart did not crumble overnight, nor did her scars vanish, but they began to soften. She learned to trust not only Jack but herself. The resilience she had cultivated through years of hardship became the foundation for a new hope. This hope was not naive, it was tempered by the knowledge of what had been lost and what might still be fragile. Yet, within this tempered hope, there was a quiet strength, a readiness to embrace imperfection, to accept love in its messy, complicated form. Two, caught in the evolving currents between his parents, found himself slowly opening to the possibility of a future where his family could be whole. His guarded skepticism gave way to moments of genuine connection, a shared laugh, a comforting presence during difficult times, the steady reliability of Jack's involvement in his life. The boy's world, once shaped by absence and uncertainty, began to fill with new patterns of trust and belonging. The small victories, perhaps unnoticed by the adults, were the building blocks of a deeper reconciliation. Their story did not culminate in a perfect resolution, for life rarely offers such neat conclusions. Instead, it ended with a fragile but undeniable promise, a commitment to continue, to try again, to nurture the delicate bond they had begun to mend. This promise was not spoken in grand declarations but lived in everyday acts of care, patience, and forgiveness. It was found in Kate's quiet acceptance of Jack's imperfections, in Jack's unwavering presence despite his fears, and in Two's tentative but growing sense of safety. The psychological complexity of their reunion lay in this very imperfection, the recognition that love and family are not about erasing pain or rewriting history, but about weaving together fractured pieces into something resilient and real. It was about holding space for vulnerability without judgment, allowing wounds to coexist with healing, and understanding that true connection requires both courage and grace. In the closing chapters of their shared story, Jack, Kate, and Two stood not as perfect figures but as three imperfect souls who had chosen to face the future together. Their past, with all its pain and regret, remained a part of them, but it no longer defined the contours of their lives. Instead, it became a backdrop against which new memories were painted, memories forged in the quiet strength of forgiveness, the slow rebuilding of trust, and the enduring hope that family, though fragile, could be a source of profound healing. As the seasons changed and time gently passed, the space between them filled with the rhythms of a life renewed, ordinary moments made extraordinary by the depth of meaning they now held. In this renewed family, love was neither simple nor easy, but it was real. And in that reality lay their greatest victory, the courage to begin again, not in spite of their scars, but because of them.